There are no deserts more deceptive than the high plateaus of the Himalayas, and no peace more fragile than that which depends on unmarked lines in the snow. On the roof of the world, along a disputed frontier, spanning nearly 2,000 miles, two of the most populous nations on Earth are preparing for a war they publicly insist they do not want. Yet their actions tell a different story. In the past 5 years, the People's Republic of China has undertaken one of the most ambitious infrastructure campaigns in modern military history, not in the Taiwan Strait, not in the South China Sea, but across the Himalayas. The Chinese government is spending more than $40 billion to carve through mountains and permafrost, to lay railways, pave highways, expand airports, and construct entire villages, all within striking distance of the Indian frontier. The jewel of this strategy is the Sichuan-Tibet Railway. Once completed, it will slash travel time between Chengdu, a major industrial hub in southwestern China, and Lhasa, the capital of the Tibet Autonomous Region, from 34 hours to just 13. The official narrative describes this network as a developmental achievement, a civilizational uplift for Tibet, an instrument of integration and prosperity. But the terrain tells another story. What China calls integration, India increasingly sees as encirclement. What China calls connectivity, India sees as coercive positioning. And what China frames as modernization, India interprets as mobilization. Because every road that runs parallel to the border, every tunnel that bypasses the mountains, every rail line built to military standards, also shortens the distance between barracks and battlefield. And in a region where the frontier is not fixed, where maps remain contested, and where nationalist sentiment runs deep, the deployment of infrastructure is not just civil engineering. It is strategic signaling. It is deterrence by preparation. It is the rehearsal of conflict by other means. This escalation did not emerge from a vacuum. It is rooted in a longer geopolitical fault line, one that has remained unresolved since the decolonization of Asia. India inherited a legacy of disputed borders from British imperial cartography. China inherited a revolutionary doctrine of territorial restoration. Together, these trajectories collided violently in 1962, when the two nations fought a brief but bloody war over Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. That war ended with a Chinese victory and a unilateral ceasefire line. But it did not resolve the claims. Instead, it institutionalized ambiguity, freezing the boundary in place while national ambitions continued to evolve. And now, those ambitions are backed by infrastructure. For decades, the region remained remote, underdeveloped, and logistically inert. But that strategic inertia has now been broken. Since the 1990s, Beijing has paved thousands of miles of roads through Tibet, accelerating the process in the past decade. Many of these roads run just miles from the line of actual control, the unofficial boundary with India. Their dual-use nature, ostensibly for trade and civilian mobility, but fully capable of supporting armored convoys, has transformed the landscape. This is not merely construction. It is capacity building. It is access denial in reverse to place, the kind that allows fast ingress to disputed zones under the legal cover of national territory. And while China officially denies any aggressive intent, Indian analysts are watching the pattern, not the press releases. Because in 2020, India's own roadwork near Ladakh became the flashpoint for the deadliest border clash in nearly half a century. Dozens of soldiers were killed in hand-to-hand combat. No guns were fired, but the message was loud. Infrastructure is escalation, and China is building more of it faster than ever. Shall I continue with Part 2? It will analyze India's limited countermeasures, the asymmetric pace of infrastructure development, and the transformation of local geography into a strategic chessboard. India has not remained passive, but it is not keeping pace. While China pours billions into hardened highways, high-altitude airfields, and electrified railways across the Tibetan Plateau, India's response has been more modest, more fragmented, and more constrained by both geography and governance. In the state of Arunachal Pradesh, a region fully controlled by India but entirely claimed by China, New Delhi is constructing a 1,000-mile frontier highway. It is an impressive project by Indian standards, linking remote valleys and border posts that were previously accessible only by air or on foot. There is also the Sela Tunnel, an ambitious engineering feat designed to allow year-round troop movements through snow-blocked passes near the Tawang sector. But these efforts, though strategically necessary, remain limited in comparison to China's comprehensive doctrine of connectivity. Most of India's infrastructure along the frontier is defensive in posture, reactionary in origin, and slower in execution. By contrast, China's approach is integrated, synchronized, and purpose-built for dual use. In Beijing's planning, a road is never just a road, and a village is never just a village. Each node, each hub, each tunnel and runway feeds into a wider strategic lattice that enables force projection, logistical speed, and civilian-military fusion. This is not mere development. It is terrain shaping, and the result is a steadily shrinking time lag between political decision and military mobilization. In the late 1990s, Chinese forces would have needed close to a month to position troops and supplies along the contested border zones. Today, Indian defense analysts estimate that the window has narrowed to less than 1 week. Some say 5 days. Some say less. And in conflict scenarios involving rapid escalation, that difference can be decisive. One of the clearest manifestations of this doctrine is the Sichuan-Tibet Railway. It is not the first of its kind. Back in 2006, China completed the Qinghai-Tibet Railway, linking Xinging to Lhasa, with over $4 billion in investment and more than 900 kilometers of track laid over permafrost and unstable terrain. That line redefined mobility across western China. But the new project, the Sichuan-Tibet Line, is far more strategic. Its eastern terminus lies in Chengdu, home to the headquarters of the People's Liberation Army's Western Theater Command. Its western terminus lies in Lhasa, the political heart of Tibet, and a vital staging point for any military deployment along the India border. The route punches through some of the world's most unforgiving terrain, but once complete, it will shorten the journey to less than half a day, with speeds capable of carrying not just tourists, but entire battalions. Analysts have warned of this dual capability. The same train car that carries passengers in peacetime can carry armored vehicles in wartime, and the same track that transports commerce can transport conflict. India has acknowledged the strategic challenge. But while New Delhi has proposed rail links of its own, including planned extensions through the northeast frontier, these projects remain underfunded, underbuilt, and largely aspirational. As one Indian analyst put it plainly, when it comes to railroads near the border, Indian infrastructure is nearly non-existent. That disparity has cascading effects. In any high-altitude conflict especially, one fought above 15,000 feet, logistics are king. Ammunition, food, fuel, and medical evacuation must move rapidly across treacherous passes. Helicopters can help, but they are vulnerable. Air bases matter, but so do runways, altitude, and weather. What China is doing is building out a full-spectrum logistics backbone across the entire frontier. And this backbone is designed not just to withstand geography, but to master it. The transformation is not limited to the ground. China is also reshaping the skies. Shall I continue with Part 3? In the next section, we will examine the shift in air power, missile doctrines, and nuclear asymmetry, and how these are reframing the strategic equation in the Himalayas. At high altitudes, the margin for error narrows, and the speed of escalation quickens. Air power, once considered a secondary factor in the Himalayan standoff, is now emerging as a critical pillar in the strategic equation between China and India. On paper, India holds a numerical advantage. Its air bases in places like Tezpur, Yorhat, and Leh are geographically closer to the line of actual control than China's major bases in the Tibetan Plateau. Indian aircraft have shorter flight times, more loitering capacity, and deeper maintenance networks in the plains below. But proximity is not supremacy. Because what China lacks in location, it compensates for in doctrine. The People's Liberation Army has invested heavily in missile-centric warfare, a doctrine built not around dogfights or aerial duels, but around denial, saturation, and precision strikes. China's inventory includes hundreds of medium-range ballistic and cruise missiles capable of striking Indian airfields before aircraft can even take off. This is not a theory. It is a rehearsed scenario, supported by simulations, and embedded in the PLA's concept of operations. In this view, the air war would begin before the air forces are airborne. And in such a context, hardened shelters, dispersal airfields, and rapid runway repair become as important as fighter squadrons. There is also the nuclear variable, seldom discussed in public forums, but quietly acknowledged in every serious wargame. China is estimated to possess more than 600 nuclear warheads, with a growing share mounted on road mobile launchers, submarine platforms, and intermediate-range systems capable of reaching every Indian metropolis. India's nuclear arsenal is significantly smaller, estimated at under 120 warheads, with a no-first-use policy and a second-strike posture largely dependent on land-based systems. This asymmetry does not make a nuclear exchange more likely, but it does influence conventional calculations. Because every skirmish, every standoff, every violation of the line of actual control unfolds in the shadow of escalation thresholds. And in an environment where hypersonic glide vehicles, long-range missile systems, and dual-use delivery platforms blur the line between conventional and nuclear strike capabilities, the risk of misperception grows exponentially. Air superiority is also about hardware. And here, too, the dynamic is evolving. China fields a growing fleet of fifth-generation J-20 stealth fighters integrated with its domestic air defense networks and supported by airborne early warning platforms. India, meanwhile, operates a mix of Russian Su-30 MKIs, French Rafales, and older MiG variants capable aircraft, but heterogeneous in logistics and maintenance. The Indian Air Force has improved readiness levels in recent years, especially after the Balakot strike in 2019 and the subsequent skirmishes with Pakistan. But it now faces a broader strategic dilemma, one in which the northern front with China requires as much attention, if not more, than the western front with Pakistan. And yet, resources are finite, and procurement cycles are slow. There is also an emerging third dimension: unmanned aerial systems. Drones are no longer peripheral assets. They are now central to reconnaissance, targeting, and even offensive operations. China's military-industrial base has become one of the largest drone producers in the world, and many of its platforms, including the Winglong and CH series, have been exported, deployed, and tested in real-world combat environments. Some of those environments include India's own neighborhood. In 2019, during clashes between India and Pakistan, Pakistani forces deployed Chinese-made drones in surveillance and strike roles. This was not lost on Indian military planners, because even if China is not a direct combatant, its systems, its doctrine, and its industrial reach are shaping the air picture across the subcontinent. In sum, air dominance in the Himalayas is no longer just about runway access or flight ceilings. It is about integration, range, survivability, and tempo. And in all these dimensions, the technological race is accelerating. But it is not only machines that China is deploying to the border. It is also people. Shall I proceed with Part 4? It will examine China's population transfers, the strategic function of border villages, and the use of civilian presence as territorial leverage. Territory is not just measured in lines drawn on maps, but in the presence of people on the ground. Beijing understands this. And along its frontier with India, China has begun deploying not just troops, but civilians. Between 2018 and 2023, the population of China's border regions grew by over 10%, an increase that, on its surface, may appear modest, but in geostrategic terms, is significant. These are not organic population flows. They are orchestrated settlements. Entire villages are being constructed along the frontier, many in regions previously deemed inhospitable due to altitude, terrain, or climate. China calls them Shaokang villages, a term associated with moderate prosperity, but their function goes beyond economics. They are forward-positioned civilian enclaves designed to reinforce territorial claims, enhance surveillance, and provide potential staging areas for paramilitary or logistical support. In short, they are dual-use outposts in civilian disguise. Satellite imagery has confirmed the pattern. Hundreds of structures, some located miles within contested areas, have emerged in recent years, often connected by new roads, equipped with solar panels, and integrated into digital surveillance grids. Official narratives present these villages as poverty alleviation programs for Tibetans, but the strategic logic is clear. A road can be denied. A bunker can be bombed. But a village, populated by citizens, creates facts on the ground. And facts on the ground become bargaining chips at the negotiating table. This tactic is not unique. It fits within a broader Chinese doctrine often described by analysts as salami slicing, a strategy of incremental encroachment, where each individual move appears too small to warrant escalation, but over time shifts the strategic balance. It has been observed in the South China Sea, where reefs become runways, and in the East China Sea, where Coast Guard patrols normalize presence near the Senkaku Islands. Now, it is being applied to the Himalayas. In Arunachal Pradesh, a region entirely administered by India but wholly claimed by China, Beijing has begun issuing Chinese names for Indian-controlled towns and geographical features. It is not cartographic trivia. It is political signaling. Each renaming is an assertion of sovereignty, a message to both domestic and international audiences that China considers the territory not in dispute, but already decided. India has responded in kind. New Delhi has launched the Vibrant Villages program, a policy aimed at reversing outmigration from its Himalayan frontier by improving local infrastructure and incentivizing settlement. But, like its road and rail efforts, this initiative remains limited in scope and reactive in nature. Indian officials acknowledge the asymmetry. While China builds entire villages from scratch, India is upgrading hamlets. While China floods the region with subsidies and digital connectivity, India is struggling to provide basic services across its high-altitude border zones. This is not just a development gap. It is a presence gap. And in a region where presence equals possession, that distinction matters. Because the next standoff may not erupt over a military incursion. It may erupt over a village, a name, a flag raised quietly in a remote valley, far from Delhi, and even farther from Washington. This creeping strategy has already reshaped India's threat perceptions. But the challenge lies not just in tactics, but in tempo. Because the pace of Chinese infrastructure development, military modernization, and territorial assertion continues to outstrip India's ability to respond. In a confrontation defined by altitude, ambiguity, and acceleration, command structure is not a formality. It is a strategic fulcrum. China's Western Theater Command, headquartered in Chengdu, is the military authority responsible for operations across Tibet, Xinjiang, and the entire border with India. At roughly 2.6 million square miles, It spans an area larger than 80% of the contiguous United States. It is the largest of China's 5 theater commands, and in many ways, the least understood. For decades, this region was viewed as strategically secondary, a buffer zone more than a battleground. But that view is now obsolete. Over the past 10 years, the Western Theater Command has undergone a transformation. Its operational doctrine has been updated, its logistics chains have been hardened, and its integration with civilian infrastructure, railways, roads, heliports, and digital networks has advanced with remarkable speed. Unlike traditional deployments focused on the eastern seaboard and Taiwan, this command is optimized for inland power projection, designed to move forces swiftly across harsh terrain and sustain them under extreme environmental conditions. In modern Chinese doctrine, mobility is not the final step before conflict. It is the opening move. The development of high-altitude airfields in Ngari, Shigatse, and Lhasa is a key part of this evolution. These bases, once limited in functionality, now host multi-role fighters, surveillance platforms, and supply aircraft capable of operating at elevation. They are supplemented by heliports, many newly built, that enable rapid insertion of forces into narrow valleys and contested zones. But beyond platforms and facilities, there is an emerging architecture of command, one that fuses satellite reconnaissance, electronic warfare, and cyber operations into a unified framework of real-time targeting and decision-making. This is not reactive military posture. It is active deterrence. It is designed not just to respond to Indian movements, but to preempt them. By contrast, India's Northern Command, which oversees the Ladakh region, remains constrained by terrain, infrastructure, and institutional bandwidth. Its air support is closer, its troops are acclimatized, and its doctrine has evolved since the 2020 Galwan clash, but it is still responding to an adversary that sets the tempo. And in military strategy, tempo is initiative. China now holds that initiative across much of the line of actual control, not because it has more troops deployed at all times, but because it can deploy faster, farther, and with greater logistical endurance when the need arises. That differential is not static. It is growing, and it shifts the burden of escalation onto India. If India responds to an incursion, it risks being labeled the aggressor. If it waits, it risks being outmaneuvered. This is the paradox of strategic ambiguity in an asymmetric infrastructure environment. One side moves in centimeters. The other must respond in kilometers. Yet it is not only geography that China is trying to master. It is perception. In any modern conflict, the battlefield extends beyond terrain and technology. It includes the domain of perception. And here, China is conducting a parallel campaign, one rooted not in troop movements or missile ranges, but in narrative shaping, legal ambiguity, and psychological signaling. What analysts refer to as 3 warfares, public opinion warfare, psychological warfare, and legal warfare, are now embedded in Beijing's approach to the Himalayan frontier. Each element operates in tandem. Each reinforces the illusion of control. And each is designed to preempt both Indian resistance and international sympathy. Consider the use of nomenclature. China's Ministry of Civil Affairs has issued new Chinese names for dozens of locations within Indian-administered Arunachal Pradesh. These names appear in official maps, documents, and internal communications, gradually constructing an alternate reality in which China is not asserting claims, but simply reaffirming sovereignty. It is a slow erosion of India's narrative advantage. Each map revision, each public statement, each cartographic adjustment pushes the boundary of perception closer to Beijing's position. In the court of global opinion, clarity often erodes faster than territory. Psychological operations are more direct. China frequently broadcasts footage of military drills in Tibet, synchronized movements of armored columns, missile launches at altitude, and large-scale exercises simulating rapid deployment. These are not random exercises. They are calibrated signals. Messages directed at India's political class, its military leadership, and its domestic audience. The goal is not only to deter, but to create doubt, to raise questions about readiness, about response time, about escalation dominance. India's media often amplifies these messages, unintentionally highlighting Chinese buildups and raising alarm without strategic framing. This creates a second-order effect, an internal psychological burden that complicates policy choices in New Delhi. Should India match China's moves symmetrically? Should it absorb the pressure and respond diplomatically? Or should it escalate preemptively to regain initiative? Each option carries risk, and Beijing understands that uncertainty is a weapon. Legal warfare completes the triad. In international forums, China has framed the boundary issue as an inherited colonial injustice, one that must be rectified in the name of national unity and historical accuracy. This framing resonates with certain global South nations, many of which share a post-colonial narrative and harbor skepticism toward Western-drawn borders. While India emphasizes the sanctity of the McMahon Line and its consistent administrative control over Arunachal Pradesh, China questions the legitimacy of that line altogether. And in the absence of a formal border treaty, ambiguity becomes advantage. This strategy is not designed for immediate victory. It is designed for gradual normalization, to condition the international system to accept China's growing presence and activity as a fact, not an aggression. This is the strategic equivalent of boiling the frog. And unless India counters with its own comprehensive narrative, the risk is not just territorial loss, but narrative erosion, where the world forgets which side crossed the line first, or worse, which line mattered at all.